So without a doubt, there's a lot of series out there that are similar to Tokyo Ghoul in one way or another, from heavily inspired all the way to small concepts and character archetypes. Series like Parasite and Happiness, for example, two that I've talked about quite a bit that share a similar reading experience for its narrative that is something familiar and emotional. However, I wanted to look for series that were further away from being related to Tokyo Ghoul, but still managed to channel that same familiar reading experience, stuff that isn't necessarily under the direct comparison spotlight. Over the past week or two, I've been reading 3 completely different series that sit at opposite ends at one another, that tackle many different subjects and ideas in various ways. I found their approach to many of these things, whether it be surface level or deeply explored, was rather reminiscent of Tokyo Ghoul in some fashion. What I found engaging about these series, when theoretically lined up with one another, is that each one is an entirely different experience and handles its narrative in a unique way. I feel the only similarities between all 3 of them is that their stories are rather self-contained and controlled, meaning it never feels like the story is artificially unfolding with every iteration of a chapter, which if it did, would probably make you think it could last indefinitely. Instead, it feels the narrative is being told from an already completed mindset. New ideas definitely come and go, but none that ever make the core of the story overly elongated or artificially expanded, usually due to an increase in popularity or success. Something as simple as this is honestly rather refreshing. It's not necessarily unique, but it's a welcome change of pace, especially if you're reading weekly or monthly series that are ever expanding. So with the opening out of the way, the first series that I want to take you through is something a decent amount of you have been asking for. A series that definitely has a healthy chunk of popularity behind it, yet is hardly talked about, probably because of its infrequent releases. From my knowledge, it has 2 CGI anime seasons that were uneasily received, but the manga is easily gripping and realistic. A powerful but dark twist on conflicting human morals and challenging ethics that shape the world and cascade down to humans that are immortal due to an unknown entity. This series would be known as Ajin. Ajin follows the story of a young teenage boy known as Kei Nagai, an extremely intelligent but obnoxiously logical person who wishes to become a flourishing doctor. However, his simple and normal world would be completely ripped away from him, as his accidental death would awaken a mysterious entity that would make him immortal. Because of this awakening, and his public showcase of death and immortality, the government, with their already existing knowledge of these entities, would put pressure on Nagai and try to capture him at any means. With his back against the wall and people moving in, his childhood friend Kaito would step in to help him escape. Before long, however, Nagai would separate with Kaito as to not drag him in any deeper, ultimately being on his own and searching for people similar to himself. It wouldn't be long before misplaced trust would lead to Nagai being caught by the government, and we get stuck in an endless loop of experimentation and torture, repeating death over and over again. So I actually remember reading this series many years ago. I feel it had around 20 or so chapters at the time, which in comparison to where it is now with around 80 chapters for a monthly series, it's definitely been a while. I remember really enjoying it. I thought the premise was intriguing, and the artwork was beautifully dark and gritty. The overall direction was a little wonky but surprisingly unpredictable. What helped these things blend together rather nicely was the mystery surrounding the ghost-like entities that would make people immortal, but also how engaging and authentic the characters and their emotions felt. Back then, I would have never imagined how far they would truly take it, challenging human morals and ethics, tackling corrupt governments infringing on human rights, a fight between a subspecies of humans that have supernatural abilities and are immortal against the government that is either trying to wipe them out completely, horrendously torture them, or use them to push humanity forward in different profitable avenues. Over the week of reading close to 80 chapters, Ajin explores all of these concepts and more, while showcasing them in a brutal and visceral type of way. It doesn't hold back on its punches. On the contrary, it uses them to drive home a powerful message, either relating to the global situation at hand or the internal feelings for that character. Because of this, even though the narrative involves supernatural elements, the message behind a lot of the reasoning is still rather impactful because of its authenticity. So you could take this story and easily apply it to our everyday life now. If humans appeared that had supernatural things about them, how would the world respond? Would we be scared? Would we welcome them? Would the government wipe them out or hideously experiment on them, or even worse? There is undoubtedly a lot of questions and variations there that wrap around human morals and the core basics of ethics. This is Ajin's heart. The pillars that stem off it and control the flow of the narrative would be the characters and their conflicting mindsets, a battle of warped perspectives and understanding. Take our main character Kei Nagai for example. He is an extremely intelligent person that doesn't let his emotions get in the way of decision making. Thus it makes him come off extremely emotionless and highly logical, seeking results based on grounded logic and evidence rather than being backed by emotion. This is further ingrained into him after getting tortured by the government and losing trust in people, which falls back onto his own personal and even selfish decision making. Throughout the narrative, however, this is a beautiful point that slowly expands and grows with experience and knowledge as he slowly starts to care for people and puts them before himself. This doesn't come naturally. It comes with the understanding of a villain known as Sato, who is extremely volatile and unpredictable, someone only Nagai can compete with and understand. As Sato progresses further with his plan to completely dethrone the government in vicious and terrorist-like ways, originally he was the one that pushed Nagai into being experimented on, so Nagai would come to hate humans and want to work with him. That didn't happen, mostly because of how numb and cold Nagai is to begin with. His logic and minimal care for human life, even after being tortured, isn't warped into hating humans. Thus, a game of intellectual cat and mouse is born between them, Nagai fighting to understand Sato's movements, and in return Sato's experience which leads him to challenging Nagai and destroying everything with ease. Even with supernatural abilities and the ghost-like entities that make people immortal, the most powerful tool they both have is their intelligence. This is where Ajin shines in all the right departments, which makes for such an unpredictable but engaging read. The cat and mouse game is built off intelligence and utilizing said supernatural abilities and immortality to the highest and smartest degree to outmaneuver the opponent. This makes Sato such a vibrant villain, as he controls everything by staying 10 steps ahead, with everyone trying their best to keep up with him. Yet even as a reader, you can never truly tell what Sato is thinking or even planning. You'll be surprised with how many times you think you know what he's going to do. Then he completely subverts your expectation with ease. It's an extremely enjoyable thing to read, seeing both Nagai and Sato clash with intelligence, conflicting morals, ideals, and selfish desires. It's enthralling and never really gets old. In conclusion, Ajin has a lot to offer. It will definitely keep you on your toes with every action and response from characters. Its artwork is dark and gritty. It paints the ghost-like entities in a terrifying and vicious light. What I assume to be is the final arc currently keeps building upon itself and escalating to such high consequences that never gives you a chance to breathe. Without a doubt, I feel a lot of people would enjoy Ajin, and I'd highly recommend you give it a go. So, with Ajin out of the way, let's take a closer look at something a little calmer, something even cute or easy. The authentic romance and relationship between a young college woman and a half vampire. The series would be known as Devil's Line. Devil's Line follows the journey of two different characters. The first would be known as Tsukasa Taira, a shy young college student living a pretty normal, everyday life. The second would be known as Yuki Anzai, a half-vampire who works within an experimental police squadron comprised of humans and vampires. Taira would get into an altercation with her friend who is secretly a vampire driven by bloodlust, as Anzai would be the person to come to her rescue. This encounter would kickstart an odd relationship between them, with Taira being drawn to Anzai's quirky but withheld personality, while Anzai finds himself at peace and comfort when around Taira. Both would quickly start to spend more time with each other, as even though a relationship between a human and a vampire is difficult, they both inherently cherish their simple time spent with one another, thus starting a weird but fruitful love between them that comes with many difficult hurdles, as they both get dragged into completely different worlds they have never experienced before. Now, I don't think I've talked all too much about romance series, so if you didn't know, I absolutely adore them, especially if they're done extremely well. The ones I tend to cherish a lot more are usually the ones that feel rather genuine or realistic, And I understand these may not be for everyone, as normally they are pretty slow and not as flashy. But the betrayal of emotion and the birth of a flourishing relationship feels real. It feels impactful and has a lot of weight behind it because of this slow and methodical process of building its characters. This is pretty much the focus for Devil's Line, as even though a romance between human and vampire is overly done and even cliche, the amount of attention that goes into both Tyra and Anzai is beautiful, especially with how somewhat normalized the vampires are. They aren't necessarily common knowledge to the everyday people, but they do coexist rather openly within society and the government, to the point where specific laws have been created to help vampires blend with humans and function with everyday life without severe consequences. Obviously, they have to abide by these laws and rules set in place just like humans would. Because of this general setting being rather odd and normalized, the flashy or mysterious aspect towards vampires normally is almost non-existent. So a massive portion of our attention turns back around and tunnels in on the unfolding and understanding of Tyra and Anzai's relationship. Tyra eventually gets dragged into Anzai's lifestyle of being a pseudo-police officer, someone that is tasked with vampire-related incidents. A lot of this stuff leads into some rather heavy political and moral conflict between the well-being of both humans and vampires, with people wanting to discriminate against vampires and wipe them out completely, while others are fighting for vampire rights and allowing them to live more openly within society. This causes a gigantic rift of clashing ideals, with terrorist-like groups coming in and trying to manipulate certain events to paint vampires as hideous abominations that will kill anything, when in reality they are rather subtle and could easily coexist peacefully alongside humans. Because of the smallish number of vampires, there's never really a vampire powerhouse that tries to overthrow the humans like you would probably expect. Instead, most vampires just want to be treated equally and with respect. It's definitely weird at first, with how normal it feels and even comes through rather slow, but this works well with the added romance and even relationships between other characters. And at the heart of that is Tyra and Anzai. I absolutely adore how they uplift one another, as even though Anzai is a vampire, he's scared of himself. He's scared of what he could do to the people that mean something to him. He's scared of loving and caring for things. He's scared of hurting people. This makes him cold and unapproachable, but when we see those emotional moments from him, it's like everything he has been storing inside for so long comes flooding out, and Tyra is the one to control it and help him through it. I don't think you would ever expect that to come from a vampire to such an emotional degree, and how open and loving Tyra is. It's a pure, cutesy relationship you can truly get behind. In conclusion, I understand Devil's Line won't be for everyone, but if anything, there is a 12-episode anime for it that came out in 2018, and I do believe it was received rather well. The art is simple and cute, but the gritty and violent moments are cinematic and ruthless. It's a very grounded approach to the typical vampire and human romance, with a pinch of clashing ideals and conflicting motives. The 70-odd chapter manga is fully complete and is a pretty easy read. So if you're looking for something normal and not overwhelming to give you a nice breather between bigger stories, Devil's Line may be a good pick for you. I'd recommend giving it a go if you're interested. So, with both Ajin and Devil's Line out of the way, let's take a look at the final series, a manga that was originally called a copycat of Tokyo Ghoul, until it started to flesh itself out and carve its own path. This series would be known as Blue Phobia. Blue Phobia takes place on a mysterious island that has now been turned into a research, experimental, and prison facility. It centers around understanding an unknown ore found deep within the ocean. This ore has strange properties that affect individuals that come in contact with it in a variety of dangerous ways. It slowly turns the skin bluish and eventually crystallizes the bone underneath. Over time, it will spread throughout the entirety of the body and kill the individual. Kai, our main character, wakes up on a research table, not being able to remember anything, as his memories have been wiped clean. But a mysterious woman known as Mia, who seems to have a close connection with Kai, comes to his rescue. as he notices that she has been heavily affected by the mysterious ore. The two join forces to try and escape the hellish facility and eventual island, as they come to learn more about each other and what is truly going on with this unknown ore and disease. I remember rather vividly when this manga first released because a lot of people were calling it a Tokyo Ghoul copycat, and off first impressions, I can definitely see the small resemblances between Kaneki and Kai's opening, especially within the art. However, this story is nothing like Tokyo Ghoul, but I do believe it may have been backed in a similar way to it, with how it was pushed out being the next quote-unquote dark weekly series. Unfortunately, it didn't get far, with it being cancelled around 18 chapters, but still managed to round off its story in a rather enjoyable way, almost like it was written to be a short story. I say all this lightly, as I don't want the word cancelled to affect the approach people may take for this series, as there are some rather interesting things about it, but at the time and its overall approach, people weren't vibing with it. Take the mysterious ore for example, and the disease it creates within people, turning skin bluish and bone to crystal, but also having properties to help propel the world forward for an alternate power consumption. The facility based on the island is extremely secretive, pushing forward with dangerous experimentations to utilize the ore to its fullest. This also includes on humans. The mysterious woman, Mia, is a patient within the facility that has been in consistent contact with the ore, as her hands and legs have a bluish tint, and her bones are slowly starting to crystallize and harden. We find out that Kai was a doctor who worked at the facility and actually cared for his patients. His research, however, was causing more harm than good, so he decided to pull the plug and escape with Mia. But not before his memories got forcefully wiped, and himself became a patient within the facility. This is where Kai and Mia make their way through the facility to try and escape, as ever so slowly Kai would start getting his memories back. They come into contact with many things affected by the ore, one being a hideous skeletal human that starts hunting them. It's fast, vicious, and horrid, but also retains a slight bit of its memories before being crystallized fully. There is a lot of surprising things within this story. A lot of different mysteries surrounding pretty much everything. The people, the monsters, the ore, and even Mia and Kai. It utilizes them pretty softly, however, considering the series got cancelled. But there was definitely a whole realm of things that could have been added to propel the story in some interesting directions. Adding more unique like monsters, different effects from the ore, even political value and conflicting motives over the ore and the disease it spreads. The list goes on. A lot of these things do fall short, and maybe if it had more time, it would have expanded into something rather beautiful and interesting. The approach towards confliction within characters was minimalistic, but rather well done. The artwork has this sense of Tokyo Ghoul mixed with depicting horrid creatures in a gruesome and terrifying type of way. The mystery of things kept you guessing in bigger intervals, from questioning the origin of the ore to what if the disease ever got outside into the real world? What would happen to humanity? For what it's worth, I think there is a little bit of enjoyment here for 18 chapters. It's nothing incredibly special, but it does make me excited to see what the author may do next. Actually, now that I think about it, Blue Phobia does also have a bit of Dead Man Wonderland vibe to it. I wouldn't be surprised if that was also a portion of its inspiration. It's unfortunate it couldn't capitalize on what it set in motion, but I still rather enjoyed reading it. There's a lot of dark elements within it that reminded me of Tokyo Ghoul heavily. So maybe when the author comes back sometime in the future potentially, we could get to witness something like them again. In conclusion, Blue Phobia may not be high on your list to read next, but you can easily find some enjoyment out of it. It's not going to change your world, but at least maybe a small portion of its characters and even a selection of its art may help you reminisce on some rooted Tokyo Ghoul aesthetics. To bring this video to a close, I'd like to apologize for this taking as long as it did. I'll try my best so it doesn't happen again. Secondly, my favorite out of the three was definitely Ajin. Something about it just clicked extremely well with me, to the point where I felt so engaged with the story that I lost track of time while reading it. I think it does a phenomenal job with what it brings to the table, and I'm more than curious to see how everything comes to a beautiful conclusion. And lastly, there is undoubtedly more series out there that share some sort of resemblance to Tokyo Ghoul in various different ways. They just have to be unearthed. If you have read any of these series, Ajin, Devil's Line, or even Blue Phobia, let me know what you think. Or if they sound interesting enough for you to check out, I'd love to hear your thoughts. But with that being said, I want to thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Drink plenty of water, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.